Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I sat at the polished oak table in the grand dining room, the soft glow of chandelier crystals catching the pearls at Rebecca's throat like droplets of moonlight. She looked radiant, every inch the poised woman I had fallen for, her spine straight and her smile rehearsed. I watched her father rise from his seat at the head of the table, a leather-bound phone in one hand and a glass of champagne in the other, expecting the usual warm words of congratulations. Instead, his gaze flicked to me, and the world stilled. I was mid-sip when he called out, voice echoing, "You only sent 50 cents?" The room froze, cutlery halfway to mouths, champagne flutes trembling in the hands of her cousins. A hush fell so complete that I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. Rebecca's father raised his phone, screen aglow with a transaction that read $0.50. He held it aloft as if brandishing a trophy. "Rebecca sends us $5,000 every month," he thundered, voice booming against the high ceiling. "And you have the audacity to send this?" My throat tightened. I could feel every pair of eyes burning into me, measuring my worth by a single penny under 50 cents. My hands shook against the stem of my glass. I opened my mouth, voice gone. That money was from me. I managed to whisper, words tasting strange on my tongue. I should have felt relief that at least one person knew the truth, but the words died before they could carry any weight. Rebecca's lips curled into a sneer as she leaned forward. "Stop stealing my credit," she snapped, her tone as sharp as broken glass. Laughter rippled through the room, first stifled giggles, then louder guffaws. Murmurs of, "Did you hear that?" and 50 cents swelled into a wave of humiliation that washed over me, pulling me under. I sank lower in my chair, wishing the floor would open and swallow me whole. In the dim warmth of that congratulatory gathering, I felt smaller than I ever had. The pearls at Rebecca's throat glittered mockingly, as brilliant and cold as the stares piercing me. Her father returned to his seat, chest puffed with pride, as if he had delivered a punchline to a grand joke at my expense. The notes of a piano concert drifted from a corner of the room, a soundtrack of oblivious elegance. Rebecca sat back, smoothing her skirt, eyes flicking away from me as if I were nothing more than a stain on the evening's perfection. I raised my glass, not in celebration, but to hide the tremor of my hand, and finished whatever remained inside me. I left the dinner early, excusing myself with a cramped smile and the flimsiest of explanations, a work emergency, a sudden headache. The city streets felt harsh under the lights as I stepped into the cool night air, Rebecca's laughter still ringing in my ears. I walked without direction, weight of embarrassment pressing on my shoulders like an iron chain. I replayed every moment, the notion of credit, her father's showmanship, Rebecca's cruel correction. I tasted bile at the back of my throat. The memory of generosity felt tainted, every dollar I had sent twisted into a symbol of my own invisibility. That night, I sat alone in our apartment, surrounded by the silence that had grown between us over months of unspoken truths. I sifted through bank statements spread across the coffee table, each line a reminder of payments I had made without question. $5,000 every month for a year, $60,000 flown out of my account, unnoticed, unappreciated. My heart pounded as I realized I had become a quiet benefactor to a family that saw me only as a wallet. A family that applauded Rebecca for gifts she never financed. A wife who took credit for my sacrifice. In the raw ache of solitude, I made a decision that felt like the first breath of freedom after drowning. I would stop the payments. No announcement, no confrontation, just the swift rerouting of funds away from her parents' account. I imagined the footsteps of change echoing through the polished hallways of their mansion, the gasp of surprise on Rebecca's lips when that familiar balance failed to appear. I pictured the way her father would frown at his bank statement, the headlines in their private group chat. "Where's our monthly gift?" I closed my eyes and imagined that moment of reckoning with a sense of calm I hadn't known in months. There was pain in the betrayal, my own, sharper than any knife edge. But beneath it lay the firm ground of resolve. The night air had slipped through my shirt as I walked home, but inside me, a spark had ignited. Whatever lay ahead, anger, blame, abandonment, I had at least reclaimed ownership of my choices. I pressed my palm to the cool glass of our window, looking out at the lights of the city that went on, indifferent to my crisis. Tomorrow, I would wake and execute the decision. I would click stop and let the quiet rebellion begin. And though I didn't know what I would find when the next month's balance failed to land in her parents' account, I felt certain that nothing could be as crushing as the humiliation of 50 cents. That night, under the glow of streetlights and the distant hum of traffic, I stopped the payments. What I discovered the following month would turn my determination into something more fierce, something that would reshape my understanding of truth, loyalty, and the cost of silence. My name is Julian Rowe, and I turned 34 last spring in a rented condo overlooking downtown St. Paul. I'm a logistics supervisor at a regional shipping company, responsible for coordinating freight routes across multiple states. Every morning I wake before dawn, brew a pot of coffee, and review the day's shipments while the city lies quiet beneath me. On paper, my life was ticking along: steady job, modest apartment, some savings tucked away. But when I married Rebecca, I convinced myself I was joining a partnership, two halves building a life together. I didn't see how quickly that half could disappear. Courtship felt like a promise stretching toward forever. I remember the first time I met her family, the way her mother extolled Rebecca's big heart over blueberry waffles, and how her father clasped my hand with a firm grip and a proud smile. I was eager to please, to show I belonged. Rebecca and I talked about our dreams. Traveling across Europe, starting a family someday, maybe buying a house near the river. I poured myself into the vision wholeheartedly, convinced we were equals forging a shared path. I felt strong and hopeful, as if the world would bend around our plans. Then her family's expectations emerged almost imperceptibly at first. Her father hinted about support. "It's good to give back," he'd say, polite as a preacher. Her mother reminded us of the sacrifices her parents had made for Rebecca's education. Rebecca mentioned casually over dinner, "We should send them something each month, show our appreciation." At first I agreed without a thought. $500 felt like a meaningful gesture, until it doubled, then quintupled, as if the number on the screen were the barometer of my devotion. I didn't question it because Rebecca never did. She'd smile when her parents praised her generosity, letting them believe the money came from her inheritance or business ventures. In private, she would thank me softly, brushing her fingers along my arm. I believed she was shielding me, sparing me embarrassment, but the truth was she was protecting her image. I became the ghost behind her generosity, the invisible source she never credited. When someone asked how she afforded such a gift, she'd nod and say, "Oh, I'm lucky," never mentioning my name. As the months passed, the payments morphed into a constant weight on my shoulders. I started taking on extra work to keep up. My weekends transformed into consulting gigs I never wanted, my evenings spent poring over side contracts. I sold my vintage guitar, a piece I'd owned since college, to cover one stubborn month. I traded in my reliable sedan for a beat-up hatchback that barely lasted a season. I canceled our annual vacation, citing budget constraints, though we never argued about it. Quietly, I sacrificed those moments, convinced I was doing the right thing. At the office, friends noticed my fatigue, but I shrugged it off. "Busy season," I'd tell them. I started losing weight from stress and lack of sleep, but I wore a smile whenever Rebecca's name came up. Inside, though, resentment grew like a dark vine twisting through my thoughts. I wondered when today's gift would be acknowledged, when someone would see the late nights and empty wallet behind the thank you notes. But the silence was all I ever heard. I became accustomed to carrying the load alone, masquerading as the supportive husband who loved giving back. One evening, I broached the subject with Rebecca, hoping for clarity. Over lukewarm takeout, I asked how she'd managed to earn enough to fund those monthly transfers. She shrugged, tracing a line on her napkin. "It's my side business income," she replied. "Nothing to worry about." I pressed on, asking if she felt burdened. She laughed, brushing aside my concern. "I'm fine," she said. "My parents just appreciate it so much." She never once asked about my own finances or offered to lighten the load. I realized then that I had become her invisible wallet. No longer did I matter as the person I used to be, my job title, my dreams, my late-night worries. I existed solely for the digital transactions I sent. My identity had narrowed to a string of numbers moving through banking apps, each transfer erasing a little more of my self-worth. It was a bitter revelation, like discovering I'd spent a lifetime building a house of cards for someone else's amusement. In my solitary moments, I recoiled at how willing I had been to lose myself. I thought back to our wedding day, to the vows we exchanged, and how hollow those words felt in retrospect. She had promised to be my partner, my confidant, but in the silence of my sacrifice, I recognized the truth. She saw me only as the means to bolster her own esteem. And I let her, because I believed love required giving everything, even if it meant disappearing. Now, as I sat at my desk at the logistics office, charting shipping routes, I resolved to reclaim my autonomy. The next time an alert popped up with $5000 on it, it would be a reminder of what I no longer wanted to be. I would no longer labor in silence, fueling dreams that were never mine. I would remember the man I once was, the one who dreamed of exploring Europe, of starting a family, of sharing life equally. That man deserved to be more than an invisible wallet. And I was ready to find him again. Rebecca's eyes danced with excitement the evening she brought up the idea. We sat in our cramped kitchen, receipts and bank statements strewn across the table like battlefield maps. "Let's label the transfers under RL Charitable," she said, voice low and conspiratorial. "It'll make it look classy, like a foundation. You know, something meaningful." The veneer of enthusiasm on her face masked the reality of what it meant for me. Another layer of deception, another reason to keep the truth buried. Yet I nodded, swallowing the unease that twisted my gut. If she thought it would spare me embarrassment, I would play along. In that moment, the ledger in my mind shifted once again, tallying another victory for her family's unspoken demands. From that day on, I became a man divided between two worlds. The one at home, where every dollar had to be justified and every purchase scrutinized, and the one at work, where shipping manifests and route optimizations offered a temporary respite from the relentless pressure of my domestic secret. I took on consulting side gigs that measured my worth not by smiles and shared dinners, but by timetables and metrics. Weekends transformed into marathons of spreadsheets and client meetings, where I pitched logistics strategies to small businesses desperate to streamline their deliveries. I never spoke of Rebecca's family or the monthly $5,000 drain. To my weekend clients, I was a competent professional, not a man crushed by silent obligation. As the months passed, I reached deeper into my reserves. I sold my prized vintage guitar, the one I had painstakingly restored in college, to cover an overage after an unexpected car repair. The guitar's warm mahogany wood, the smooth curve of its neck, and the delicate hum of its strings had once been my sanctuary, a place to exhale melodies that carried my dreams and frustrations. Now it sat in the hands of a stranger, its music traded for a bank transfer that disappeared into the family's coffers. I downgraded my reliable sedan for a beat-up hatchback that rattled down the freeway, its radio crackling with static as if echoing my own fraying nerves. Every sacrifice tightened the knot in my chest, yet I continued, convinced that love required this level of endurance. At home, the cracks began to show. I found myself tensing at the slightest mention of her family's name, my heart racing when a new transaction alert buzzed on my phone. Rebecca, meanwhile, maintained her flawless composure. On the rare nights when we sat down to dinner together, she would ask about my day, but only briefly, then switch the conversation back to the foundation, to her latest fashion collaboration, to a podcast interview she'd agreed to. I would smile and nod, maneuvering my words with care, burying the resentment that rose like bile in my throat. In public, I was still the proud husband, beaming at her successes, celebrating her ingenuity. In private, I was the silent workhorse, beaten down by gratitude that had never been expressed. The most painful moments came when her parents praised Rebecca for acts I had financed. I listened while her mother gushed about Rebecca's altruism at family gatherings, unaware that each commendation was a dagger aimed at my dignity. When her father called to discuss a new charitable initiative, I volunteered ideas, offered contacts. It was easier than apologizing for a depleted bank account. I became the invisible architect behind their generosity, and they never suspected a thing. Yet in whispered moments, I began to fear that one day the architect would vanish, and the structure of lies would collapse. I wondered, not for the first time, what it would feel like to refuse, to simply stop lifting their burdens. One evening, after another round of forced praise at a family brunch, I found myself trembling as I drove home. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles whitened, the outlines of my plan for the coming month crystallizing in my mind. I would send the money as usual, one more time, then pause, retreat into the silence I had cultivated over months of unmet sacrifice, and see what happened. Would they notice? Would Rebecca care? I felt a flicker of defiance, the first spark of anger that wasn't smothered by love. It was terrifying to consider the fallout. I had built my life around ensuring their comfort. But I was beginning to realize that my own comfort, my own identity, mattered more than their endless demands. That night, I opened my laptop in the soft glow of our bedroom lamp and typed out the transaction as I always did, $5,000 to RL Charitable. My finger hovered over the send button, and for a brief moment I thought about stopping. But years of conditioning flashed before me, the congratulatory toasts, Rebecca's polite nods, the steady applause for a generosity that wasn't hers. I clicked send, watching the numbers swirl away in a whirlpool of obligation. I closed the laptop and lay awake, listening to the hum of the city outside, knowing I had committed once more to a sacrifice that was slowly killing me. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I wondered how much longer I could sustain the masquerade. The cracks beneath the surface were widening, and I was no longer certain I could hold the structure together. Somewhere in the tangled web of lies and obligations, I had lost sight of the man I once was, a man who sought partnership, not servitude. Love, not subjugation. And as the dawn approached, I realized that if nothing changed soon, I would wake to a life defined entirely by what I gave away, rather than what I kept for myself. The silence that had protected me thus far was beginning to suffocate. The question was no longer how long I could endure, but whether I could summon the courage to break free. I woke the morning after the dinner fiasco with a sense of hollow calm, the sting of humiliation still smoldering behind my eyes. I lay in bed, tracing the patterns of light and shadow on the ceiling, feeling the weight of months of silent sacrifice pressing against my chest. In that quiet, I made the decision. I would stop the payments. No grand announcement, no argument, just a swift flick of the finger that would reroute every future dollar away from her parents' account. I pictured the alert popping up on my phone, the almost believable note that RL Charitable had been paused. I imagined Rebecca's shock, the tremor in her voice when she wondered why the familiar transfer never arrived. By midday, I had opened a new account at a different bank, one Rebecca didn't know about, and arranged for my direct deposit to split between here and a personal savings fund I had long neglected. It was painless, too easy, in fact. I froze the joint credit card with a single call and canceled the autopay setup that had drained my checking balance for the past year. When I hung up, a strange thrill ran through me, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you could fly. I closed my eyes and let the rush settle, replacing my fear with resolve. I didn't mention a word to Rebecca. Instead, I went about my day as if nothing had changed. At the office, I coordinated shipments and replied to urgent emails, the usual hum of logistics providing a welcome distraction from the storm I knew was brewing at home. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced myself, expecting her text asking why the transfer had failed. But nothing came, at least not yet. I wondered if silence would cushion the blow or make it sharper when it landed. That evening, I met Leon for dinner at our favorite Thai spot. Leon had been my confidant since college, the friend whose calm pragmatism balanced my overthinking. I watched him stir his soup and cleared my throat. I stopped it, I said, voice low. He looked up, eyebrows raised, then nodded for me to continue. I explained how I'd rerouted my income and frozen the card. He listened without judgment, his silence more supportive than any counsel. Good, he said when I finished. Now let's see how deep this goes. Over sticky rice and spicy curry, I pulled out my laptop and asked him to run a deeper background check on Rebecca's contributions. I wanted to know, with cold precision, exactly how much she'd paid versus how much I had. Leon tapped away, as narrowing as he compiled data from bank statements, tax records, any filings under her name. The hush between us filled with the hum of air conditioning and the occasional clink of utensils from the next table. By the time we finished dessert, he had results. He slid the spreadsheet across the table without a word. I stared at the numbers, 12 months of contributions, each cell a glaring zero under Rebecca's column and $60,000 under mine. Not a cent had her name touched. The disparity felt like a punch to the gut, both in validation of my sacrifice and an insult to my intelligence. My hands trembled as I ran my finger down the zeros, each one a testament to my years of blind devotion. Leon broke the silence. You knew it, but seeing it broken down, this changes everything. His words landed like stones in my chest, the ripples of their impact spreading through my thoughts. Suddenly, the betrayal crystallized. It wasn't simply that she had taken credit, but that she had built a narrative entirely on lies. Her parents believed her generosity was boundless, when in truth it was entirely mine. The foundation she touted existed only in her words. My money was the mortar holding it aloft. I want to know what they did with it, I said, closing the spreadsheet and minimizing the window. A new fire ignited inside me, fueled by a need for understanding and perhaps revenge. Leon nodded, already opening another set of files. I'll look into that next. Financials, property purchases, any debts paid off. It's all in there. I leaned back, feeling a grim satisfaction at finally cracking open the shell of secrecy that had trapped me. That night, I lay in bed again, but sleep did not come easily. My mind reeled with possibilities, confronting Rebecca with the raw truth, exposing her to her family's disappointed gazes, reclaiming my dignity. Yet a quieter voice whispered caution, reminding me that exposure would bring chaos, and perhaps I wasn't ready for the wreckage it would cause. I pictured her mother's tears, her father's anger, the cascade of accusations that would follow. But I also pictured myself standing tall for the first time in years, no longer the invisible hand pulling the strings behind her charity. As the clock ticked past midnight, I closed my eyes and made another decision. I would wait a few days before confronting anyone. I would gather all the information Leon could unearth, then choose the moment when the truth would strike hardest. In that tense waiting, I recognized the strength I had lost and was beginning to rediscover. The secret life of generosity, my generosity, was no longer mine alone. I would share it with the world, and in doing so, reclaim the man I was always meant to be. When sleep finally arrived, it was accompanied by the first real dream I had in months. Myself, standing on a hill overlooking a vast expanse of water, arms outstretched, unburdened by weight. The horizon was endless, promising freedom I had almost forgotten existed. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it was real. I slid the spreadsheet across the kitchen table, its rows and columns glowing on the screen like a confession written in cold, unblinking digits. Rebecca stirred her tea, brows knitting as she registered the data before her. The quiet between us thrummed with tension, years of unspoken sacrifices distilled into zeros that mocked her every claim. Why did you lie? I asked, voice low but steady, the question carving a chasm between us. She set her cup down with a soft clink, as if she were examining a diamond under a jeweler's lamp. You wouldn't understand, she said, eyes distant. They respect me more this way. Her words landed like stones in my gut. Respect her more? I recalled her mother's glowing toasts, her father's congratulatory nods, all built on my years of silent withdrawals, on the myth of Rebecca's benevolence. My chest tightened. The notion that she valued her image over our marriage twisted inside me with a bitter edge. I leaned forward, tracing a finger along the stark line of zeros under her name. Every month, you claimed to send them $5,000, I said. Not one cent ever came from you. I watched her eyes flicker, first to the numbers, then to mine. She exhaled, as though releasing a practiced sigh. They won't care, she insisted, voice clipped. Family sticks together. They'll believe whatever story I tell them. I remembered the smug smile she wore the night of the anniversary dinner, the way she accepted praise she didn't earn. Now I saw the harsh truth. I'd been the scaffolding holding up her castle of illusions, and she never once hesitated to let me prop it up. I stood, my chair scraping against the tile floor. It wasn't just about the money, I said, pacing the small space near the sink. My footsteps echoed in the morning light. It was our life. You built your narrative on my hard work, my late nights, my sacrifices. You took credit for my labors. She watched me, arms crossed, the picture of calm indifference. I paused, letting my words hang. Do you even feel ashamed? Rebecca shrugged, an effortless gesture that infuriated me. Shame is for people who get caught, she replied. I'd do it again. Coldness spread through me, more chilling than any winter wind. I pressed my hand to the counter, knuckles white. You don't get to decide what's fair, I said. Marriage isn't a stage for your performance. It's supposed to be a partnership. Her lips twitched, as if amused. Partnership, she echoed. You lost that right the moment you became weak enough to fund my reputation. Silence settled again, heavier this time. I stared at her, really saw her for the first time, the steel behind her eyes, the ease with which she manipulated those around her. My heart pounded, adrenaline flooding my veins. I realized that the person I loved no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone who saw relationships as transactions, affection as leverage. I felt a sorrow so vast it threatened to drown me. Not for the money, but for the betrayal of the vows we once spoke of love and loyalty. I needed to know more. That evening, I messaged Leon to dig deeper into her family's finances. I want names, I wrote. Properties, purchases, investments, everything that my money built. He sent over preliminary files, a racehorse purchased 6 months ago, training stables in another state, a jewelry boutique fronted by her mother, and a small startup in which Rebecca's ex-partner held a majority stake. Each asset bore the fingerprints of my transfers. The boutique's facade gleamed on the local business registry, complete with signage and a 2-story loft that should have taken years to finance. The racehorse's pedigree certificate listed her father as owner, but the bank records confirmed the down payment traced back to me. Anger burned in my chest as I realized how thoroughly I had been used. Rebecca's parents weren't in need of help. They craved status. They wanted the prestige of philanthropy and entrepreneurship without any of the risk. Rebecca had supplied both and pocketed the praise. My mind replayed every family gathering, every toast, every compliment. I had nodded politely while their family cheered her name, blind to the fact that I was the fuel burning behind the flames of their success. That night, I confronted her again, this time armed with evidence beyond the spreadsheet. I laid the documents before her. Purchase orders, deeds, bank reconciliations. This horse, I said, pointing to the certificate, cost $70,000. My money. She looked at me, expression inscrutable. He was a good investment, she said. You knew I believed in diversifying our portfolio. Our portfolio? I snorted. You never told me about it. You never asked. She reached out, touching my arm. The gesture felt like a barb. I needed them to believe in me, she whispered. You think I wanted to lie? I wanted respect, validation. I thought you understood. I jerked away, fury and betrayal coursing through me. Validation built on theft, I spat. Your empire of lies was nothing more than stolen wealth. Rebecca sighed, as if weary of the entire conversation. If you're so concerned, take it all back, she challenged. But don't pretend you're innocent here. Her words hit me differently than before. It wasn't an admission of guilt, it was defiance. In that moment, I saw the gulf between us. She, determined to preserve her facade, and me, desperate to dismantle it. I gathered the papers and stood, voice calm but resolute. I will, I said. Every asset you built on my money will be unmasked. And you will face the consequences you created. She watched me pack up the files, eyes flickering with something I couldn't read, regret, fear, or calculation. I didn't wait to find out. I turned away and walked toward the door, knowing that the path ahead would be ruinous but certain. In the silence of our now empty kitchen, I felt a measure of freedom. The reckoning had begun, and I had reclaimed my voice. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I realized that true power lay not in wealth or deception, but in the courage to stand for truth. I had chosen to expose her empire of lies, and in doing so, I embarked on a journey to rebuild the man I had lost and perhaps discover a life more honest than I ever dared imagine. When Leon sent over the next batch of financials, I felt my stomach knot in anticipation. I opened the folder late that night under the yellow glow of my desk lamp, the spreadsheet, family expenditures, flickering like a confession on the screen. The first tab listed property purchases, a sprawling equestrian estate in Lexington, Kentucky, titled to her father, purchased the month after our wedding anniversary. A second tab revealed a string of investments under her mother's name. Luxury jewelry collections, vintage accessory auctions, a boutique in downtown Minneapolis that had folded within 4 months, leaving a trail of debts quietly absorbed by RL Charitable. The final sheet read like a scandalous ledger, a side venture co., owned by Rebecca and her ex-boyfriend, under the benign guise of RLX Enterprises, seated with $16,000 in my funds. I sank into my chair, the weight of the betrayal settling like cold concrete in my chest. I replayed her casual mention of that business opportunity earlier that year, how she described it as an exciting collaboration to launch a lifestyle brand. I remembered her thrill when they secured a trademark, the celebratory champagne she popped at our kitchen table. I had congratulated her enthusiastically, masking the gnawing doubt in my gut. Now I saw the truth. The brand had been an elaborate ruse to channel my money into a venture where her ex would reap the profits while she basked in the applause. The jewelry boutique was no philanthropic gift to her mother. It was a vanity project destined to fail, funded by me so her mother could claim entrepreneurial success at social gatherings. And the racehorse? How many times had I absorbed Rebecca's father's lectures on bloodlines and pedigrees, praising the potential return on investment, all while he paraded the horse at private auctions, my money draped over its neck like a borrowed ribbon. I closed my eyes, swallowing a bitter lump. The realization that my entire sacrifice had been twisted into a means of aggrandizing her family cut deeper than any insult at that dinner table. Rebecca's parents didn't need help. They craved status, applause, the glossy veneer of philanthropy and commerce, and I had been their unwitting benefactor. I had spent years pouring every spare dollar into their dreams, while mine lay abandoned in cold spreadsheets. I felt a fierce surge of anger, not only at Rebecca and her family, but at myself for allowing the deceit to flourish unchecked. How had I let my own needs vanish beneath their demands? How had I mistaken their ungrateful acceptance for love? That night, I drafted a letter in my mind addressed to her parents, meticulously outlining every transaction, every purchase funded by my hand. I imagined the shock on their faces when confronted with the truth that their empire rested on my labor, not the generosity of their daughter. I pictured her mother's carefully coiffed hair dropping in dismay, her father's acquired swagger dissolving into stunned silence. But I hesitated. Destruction felt like justice, but it could also unleash irreparable ruin. I found myself teetering between catharsis and restraint, knowing that once the letter was sent, there would be no turning back. I decided instead to confront Rebecca first. I sat across from her at the cafe where we used to share morning coffees, the one with mismatched chairs and decorative succulents. I laid out the documents one by one, watching her expression flicker from surprise to indignation to practiced calm. "These are the boutique debts," I said, pointing to the ledger showing the shop's rapid losses. "This is the brand you and your ex built together." She pursed her lips, eyes narrowing. "You're obsessing," she murmured, reaching for her latte. "It was supposed to be a passion project." I leaned forward, voice low. "A passion project that cost me $60,000 and lined your ex's pockets. A project where you took full credit while I bled for it." Her nostrils flared. "You volunteered the money," she shot back. "You never asked me to stop." I pressed on, shutting down her evasion with facts. The down payment on the horse, the lease on the boutique space, the bank wires to RLX Enterprises. She glanced away, twisting a sugar packet between her fingers. "I wanted our family to have pride," she said finally, voice trembling with anger. "I wanted to be the one they looked up to, not to the man who does their accounting." I let her words hang in the air. "You chose pride over partnership," I replied, "and now you've destroyed any trust we had." She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "If you want to burn everything down, go ahead," she spat. "But don't pretend you're the victim here." She stormed off, leaving me with the remnants of her latte and a growing certainty. I had to dismantle the foundation of lies she and her parents had built, starting with exposing their ill-gotten gains. I took a deep breath, the chilly air outside the cafe brushing my face, and made the decision that would change everything. I would send that letter, not out of spite, but to forge a path toward truth, no matter how jagged the road. Back at our apartment, I drafted an email to her parents. I wrote clearly, unemotionally, outlining each transaction and its destination: the racehorse, the boutique, the shell company. I included copies of deeds, purchase orders, bank statements. I pressed send just after midnight, timing it so the email would arrive as their day began. I pictured her mother checking her inbox, red-eyed at the betrayal of her beloved daughter, her father's habitual morning coffee interrupted by the revelation that his prized chestnut mare had been financed by someone he never acknowledged. I fell asleep with my laptop still open, emails in the sent folder glowing like torches in the darkness. I didn't know what fallout awaited me, but I felt, perhaps for the first time in months, a fierce, unshakable conviction. The world of deceit that had grown around me might crumble, but in its collapse, I would carve out a space for my honesty to take root. And no matter how much rubble remained, I would rise from it. Because after investing my heart and my earnings into a lie, I was finally ready to invest in the truth. When I woke the next morning, the world felt startlingly quiet. The usual hum of anticipation, the ding of the monthly transfer notification, the familiar reassurance that $5,000 had left my account, was gone. I pressed my thumb against the phone's fingerprint reader and held my breath. No alert. Instead, a balance untouched, numbers resting in cold stillness. I exhaled, relief and fear mixing in my chest like storm clouds. I slid out of bed, careful not to wake Rebecca, whose breathing was even, unaware. I dressed quietly and made my way to the kitchen where I poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted surprisingly bitter. The steam rose in lazy spirals, and I realized I had forgotten how ordinary mornings could feel when I wasn't tethered to unseen obligations. I reached for my phone again, scrolling through my newly separate accounts. The one she didn't know about held a modest sum that was growing every day, no longer siphoned away. I stared at the numbers, my savings like a lifeline. Across the table, I could see her lounger still empty, the pillow plumped where she should be. I sipped my coffee, tasting freedom. But I also tasted guilt. I'd made a choice that would shake our world. I wondered if I could stand by it when the storm hit. By mid-morning, I was at my desk at work, coordinating freight schedules, but my mind was already rehearsing the confrontation I knew was coming. My phone buzzed once, only once, at 11:15. A text from my accountant friend, Leon. It read, "They're asking questions." No context, no detail, just those words. My pulse quickened. I typed back, "What are they saying?" Twice it buzzed before his reply. They noticed the pause. Calls from her mother asking if you're okay. Her father seems confused. No blame yet. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of computers and drones of shipping manifests fading as adrenaline surged. They were waking up to the absence I had created. I felt both proud and anxious. Proud that I had asserted control over my own finances. Anxious at the fallout, how Rebecca would react, how her parents would lash out, whether our marriage could withstand the rupture. That evening, I walked into our living room to find Rebecca perched on the arm of the sofa, phone pressed to her ear, voice tight. "Julian, this is urgent," she said, tone sharp. "Please call me when you see this." She scribbled something on a notepad and slid it across to me. Mom called. She said the money didn't come. Her eyes were narrowed, hurt flashing there like fractured glass. I swallowed. "I'll call them," I said, setting my coffee down with unexpected force. My words sounded hollow in the space between us. I dialed her parents' number, heart pounding, and waited while it rang. Her mother answered first, voice brittle with worry. "Julian, is everything all right? We didn't get the transfer today." I pictured her seated at her desk, reading that emptiness in her account like a betrayal. I took a breath, steadying myself. "I'm fine," I said, voice calm. "But I need you to know the truth. Rebecca hasn't sent a cent in the past year. Every dollar you received came from my account." There was a long pause. I could almost hear her heart thudding in her chest. "I'm sorry you feel misled," I continued, "but I can no longer support this arrangement." Her mother sputtered, indignation lacing her questions, but she said, "I know," I interrupted gently. She said it, but it wasn't true. The line crackled with disbelief. "We respected her generosity," she whispered. "You're tearing our family apart." "I'm telling you what you deserve to know," I said. "I gave until it hurt. It's time you faced the reality of it." I hung up, chest tight, and turned to Rebecca. She stood behind me, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, but with fury. "How could you?" she hissed. "You humiliated me." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. I had waited too long to speak silence into truth. "I didn't humiliate you," I said. "I showed you what giving without acknowledgement can do." Her hand trembled as she reached for my arm. "They love me," she insisted. "They'll rally around me." I shook her off gently. "They love the idea of you. They love their illusions." My voice softened. "I loved you. I still do, when you're the woman I married." She glared, pain and anger warping her features. She had built her identity on compliments and elevated status. I had ripped away the scaffolding. I watched her struggle, saw the fracture lines appear in her poise. Later that night, when she retreated to pack her things, I didn't stop her. She moved like a wounded animal, quick, tense, determined. She shoved clothes into a duffel bag, refusing my help. I watched silently, chest heavy with conflicting emotions, sorrow, relief, guilt, defiance. When she stood at the door, duffel bag slung over her shoulder, she paused. "This isn't over," she whispered. "I'll make sure you regret this." Her eyes burned with something I didn't recognize. "You don't own me, Julian." I nodded. "No," I said. "You don't." Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, then silence settled. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. I had won the battle, but I hadn't won peace. In the days that followed, calls came in waves, her father's confusion, her mother's tears, polite voicemail from the boutique's creditors. I returned to my own account, untangled from their financial demands. I refurbished my car, replaced the rattling hatchback with something reliable. I contacted a lawyer to discuss separation terms, just in case. And slowly, in the absence of her weight on my shoulders, I began to breathe again. I discovered that silence can be powerful, but it isn't surrender. It's the space where you listen, where you plan, where you reclaim yourself. Standing in the quiet of my living room, I realized that by stopping the payments, I hadn't just withdrawn money. I had withdrawn from a life that wasn't mine. The path ahead was uncertain. Her threats hung in the air like storm clouds. But for the first time in years, I felt the tremor of possibility. I would no longer be the invisible provider. I would no longer cower in shadows cast by someone else's ambition. I had chosen truth over illusion, and in doing so, I had begun to choose myself. The fallout came faster than I anticipated. Within days of the payments halting and the truth unveiled, Rebecca's world began to crumble. Her morning routine of spa treatments and influencer photo shoots shattered the moment she realized her funding had evaporated. The brunette hues she had carefully chosen for her feed, the soft focus filters she relied on to amplify her image, all felt suddenly hollow as her bank balance flashed diminishing digits. She tried the usual gambit. Post a sponsored ad, pitch a collaboration, remind her followers of her impeccable taste, but brands began to hesitate when they saw her dwindling engagement. The money she had always taken for granted was gone, and with it, the curated life she'd built on my generosity. Meanwhile, her ex-business partner, who had received $16,000 of my funds to seed their so-called lifestyle brand, sent a curt email. He was ghosting her now. No more joint ventures or shared visions of luxury. With each bounced message, the illusion of her entrepreneurial prowess unraveled. I learned of his departure through a forwarded screenshot Rebecca had left on our shared desktop, a cold reminder that he had no loyalty to her when there was no profit to be had. She paced the kitchen that night, tapping her foot in agitation, the high heels she wore around the apartment suddenly feeling out of place against the worn hardwood floors. Her mother's boutique, which I had painstakingly funded with $12,000 for inventory and overhead, could not withstand the economic downturn. The lease expired, suppliers demanded payment, and the storefront shuttered with scarcely a public announcement. I overheard her mother on the phone, voice trembling as she arranged to meet with the landlord to negotiate a settlement. The words bankruptcy and insolvent broke the silence in the nearby room like jagged glass. How quickly the veneer of success could crack when its foundation was built on borrowed funds. I felt a pang not of sympathy for her mother's misplaced dreams, but of sorrow for the family I once admired, now exposed as a house of cards. Her father fared no better. The racehorse he had been most proud of, a chestnut mare named Destined Path, had been sold at auction after training fees and veterinary bills piled up. The certificates of lineage and medical records I had helped ensure sat untouched in a drawer. The sale fetched less than half of the initial purchase price, leaving her father nursing a loss he refused to acknowledge. I learned of the sale from a neighbor who had spotted him at the stables that afternoon, his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of disappointment. I pictured him handing over the reins of that mare, pride dissolving into regret as he watched her trot away. Throughout this, I remained a silent witness to the collapse. Rebecca cursed under her breath as she scrolled through unpaid invoices and debt collector notices. She rifled through old contracts, desperately seeking a lifeline, but her written agreements bore no sign of financial backing from her own name. I watched her transition from polished influencer to cornered opponent, the gloss of her persona replaced by raw desperation. She stormed through the apartment, opening drawers in search of documents, her manicured nails scraping wood. Each unearthing of another unpaid account was a blow to her carefully constructed identity. In the evenings, I returned from work to find her mother and father camped on the couch, arguments ricocheting around the room. Her mother's voice rose to a shrill pitch as her father tried to defend his choices. Rebecca stood between them, arms folded, a spectator to the chaos she had orchestrated. It struck me then how alien this tableau was from the warm family gatherings I had once known. The same people who had toasted Rebecca's kindness and entrepreneurial spirit now bickered over borrowed money and broken promises. Their guilt and confusion hung in the air like thick smoke, choking every remnant of celebration. One afternoon, I found Rebecca in our bedroom, huddled by the window with tears streaking her cheekbones. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, vulnerable and stripped of artifice. I paused in the doorway, torn between compassion and distance. She glanced up, eyes rimmed with red, and my heart squeezed with the memory of the love that once bound us. "What have I done?" she whispered, voice barely audible. But I couldn't step forward. I had spent too long complicit in her deception, and now the only path I saw was forward, on my own. In that moment, I realized the collapse was not only financial, it was personal. Rebecca's identity, which had been interwoven with false narratives, lay in ruins. Her family, once her staunchest supporters, looked at her now with suspicion and regret. She was left to navigate the wreckage she had created, a solitary figure amid the wrecked facade of her own making. I watched her shoulders slump as she sank to the floor, head in hands, the silence between us more profound than any argument. As I stood there, I felt a quiet resolve settle over me. The collapse had been inevitable, a direct consequence of a history built on lies. Yet in the wreckage, I saw a glimmer of possibility, a chance to rebuild, to live with integrity rather than illusion. I turned away silently and walked back to my life, aware that the path ahead would require healing, not only for me, but perhaps, one day, for her as well. But for now, I embraced the solitude that followed the storm, grateful to have emerged on the other side as the man I chose to become. The envelope sat on the nightstand like a ticking time bomb. I noticed it when I brushed my teeth before bed, an ivory-colored envelope, thick, with my name scrawled in Rebecca's elegant handwriting. My heart skipped. After weeks of confrontation and collapse, I wasn't sure what to expect next: apology, accusation, or something worse. I swiped my thumb across the cool wood and picked it up, turning it over in my hands. No stamp, no return address, just my name and a simple curl of wax left over from a seal that had been pried open. I returned to the living room and sank into the armchair, envelope in hand. The city outside our window whispered with distant traffic, streetlights pooling on the pavement below. I slit the flap and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Her handwriting tilted slightly, as if she had written it in haste or with trembling fingers. "Julian," it began, "I know I've hurt you beyond words, and I'm sorry for everything. I never meant for your generosity to become a weapon, and I regret the pain I've caused. But we can fix this. Please, if you help me, just this once. We can start over. You know about the emergency fund, the trust my mother left for our future children. Help me access it, and you'll have the money you need to rebuild, and I'll have the means to prove myself worthy to my parents again. Don't take away my family's last hope." I stared at the words, the ink smudged in one corner where the tear had fallen. The emotional manipulation hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. She had baited me one last time with a promise of reconciliation, dangling the trust one had set aside for our future. My mother had insisted on the emergency fund when I first married, money for children, for unexpected hardships, for security. It was sacred to me, untouchable except in true crisis. And now she wanted access, claiming she needed it to fix everything. I folded the letter neatly and placed it on the arm of the chair, my mind racing. This was the final straw. After years of bleeding for her family's whims, after every sacrifice I had made with nothing to show but their arrogance and her lies, she had the audacity to ask for the fund meant for our children. I felt a hot surge of anger, betrayal compounded by greed. It crystallized in my chest. This would be the moment I severed the last tether to a life that had almost consumed me. In the morning, I called my lawyer. His office smelled of old leather and polished wood, a place that promised order in the midst of chaos. "I need to file for separation," I said, voice calm with conviction, "and I need to secure my emergency fund trust. It cannot be accessed by Rebecca or her family." He asked questions, dates, account details, trust documentation, and I answered each one with detached precision. He assured me the paperwork would be filed by week's end, that a restraining order on our joint assets was possible, and that the trust could be protected from any claims. Leaving his office, I felt the heavy weight on my chest begin to lift. For the first time in years, I was taking concrete steps to safeguard my future. The emergency fund would remain intact for the children I might one day have, free from the shadow of manipulation. I pictured that child's first day of school, their first scraped knee. I saw the fund paying for vitamins, books, unexpected repairs, something real, something honest. The contrast between that vision and Rebecca's letter couldn't have been starker. Back at home, the envelope still lay on the armchair. I picked it up again and studied her handwriting. There had been a time when those loops and curves would have made my heart flutter. But now, they were symbols of deceit, of a woman who valued her image over our marriage, our dreams, our children. I crumpled the envelope and tossed it in the trash can by the door. That night, I packed my own bags. Not for travel, but for creating distance, an apartment of my own, a sanctuary where my choices wouldn't be dictated by someone else's greed. I folded shirts, t-shirts, a few cherished books, my laptop. I placed each item carefully in a duffel bag, taking my time so that the act itself felt meaningful. I didn't want to rush. I wanted to savor each moment of reclaiming my life. When I zipped it shut, I paused and ran my hand over the fabric. This bag held my autonomy. Later, as I walked through our empty apartment one last time, I noticed the little things. A chipped mug in the sink, the collection of mismatched coasters on the coffee table, the blanket she always left draped over the back of the sofa. Each item held a memory, but unlike before, those memories no longer hurt. They were reminders of a chapter closed, of lessons learned. I flicked off lights as I passed each room, leaving the apartment cloaked in darkness behind me. At the front door, I hesitated. I glanced back at the hall where we had shared so many moments. Good and terrible alike. My breath caught, but I didn't allow regret to tether me. I stepped outside, closed the door gently, and locked it. The click of the deadbolt resonated like the final note of a song. I walked down the hall, down the stairs, and out into the cool night air. My duffel bag swung at my side, a silent testament to my departure. The corridor lights glowed softly, guiding me toward the parking lot. I didn't look back. That night, I slept on an air mattress in my friend Marcus's spare room. In the quiet, I allowed myself to exhale fully, to release the tension that had coiled in my shoulders for months. The envelope and the letter were gone, the last of Rebecca's manipulation discarded. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt safe. The next morning, I filled out the separation petition and transferred the emergency fund into a new account under trustee protection. Each click of the mouse echoed my resolve. I felt a fierce pride in my actions, protecting what was rightfully mine, ensuring that the future would belong to me and my children, not to manipulative schemes. As I left the bank, the sun rose over the city in golden arcs, painting the sky with promise. I inhaled deeply, tasting the potential of this new chapter. Freedom, I realized, wasn't just the absence of obligation, it was the power to choose what mattered most. I had chosen truth, chosen protection for my family's future, and chosen myself. And in that moment, walking into the dawn of a new day, I felt more alive than I ever had. 2 years have passed since I walked away from that life, walked away from Rebecca's castle of illusions and the family that mistook generosity for submission. Seattle's evergreen skyline has become my new backdrop, and I wake each morning to the gentle hum of fairy horns and the scent of cedar on misty air. I live in a modest loft in Capitol Hill, the walls adorned not with framed family photos but with maps of shipping routes and schedules from my consulting work. Sustainable transport firms hire me to streamline their operations, and I take pride in knowing that the cargo I help move travels with minimal environmental impact. It's work that aligns with my values, not one built on secrets and unacknowledged sacrifice. Most mornings, I lace up my hiking boots and head to the trails of Discovery Park, letting the solitude of towering pines and salt-kissed wind clear the residue of past regrets. Uphill, I remember the weight I once carried, $5,000 a month, my identity stripped to a series of transactions, then breathe deeply, grateful for the simplicity of my new routine. On rare days when fog shrouds the city, I feel the thrill of uncertainty, as though the world's possibilities shimmer just beyond the veil. Here, on a moss-carpeted path, I am fully present, not haunted by phantom alerts of transferred funds or stifled by the fear of what I might uncover next. It was on one of these hikes, under a sky streaked with dawn, that I met Ren. She was photographing lichen on an oak trunk, her camera lens capturing details I would have overlooked. We struck up a conversation about fungi and rail schedules. She was writing a piece on urban mycology for a local magazine and curious about how cargo trains coexist with nature corridors. Her curiosity was genuine, her laughter unguarded. I found myself sharing insights freely, no calculation of credit or condemnation beneath my words. When our hike ended, we parted with a promise to meet again for coffee at a cafe near Pike Place Market. Our first date felt effortless, like continuation rather than beginning. She asked about my move to Seattle, And I told her the story I rarely recount anymore, the one about a marriage undone by deception and the reclaiming of my life's narrative. She listened not with pity, but with empathy, as if my past were a chapter in a book we were both eager to read. When I spoke of the day I stopped the payments, Rin leaned forward. I steady. That was the moment you chose yourself, she said, voice quiet but firm. And that choice made all the difference. I surprised myself by nodding, tears prickling in my eyes, not sorrowful, but relieved. In the months that followed, Ren and I settled into a rhythm of mutual respect and unspoken understanding. We spent weekends exploring Puget Sound's islands, her boat bobbing gently as we fished for salmon and watched eagles wheel overhead. We volunteered at a community garden in Georgetown, planting heirloom tomatoes in raised beds and swapping stories over soil-stained hands. She never asked for transactional proof of my worth. She accepted me with a grace that felt both foreign and restorative. When I surprised her with a framed map of our favorite train routes, she beamed, tracing the lines with her finger, and I knew I had found a partner who valued me for who I was, not for what I provided. One crisp autumn evening, we hiked to the summit of Mount Si to watch the sunset set the Cascades ablaze in gold and crimson. At the peak, with wind tugging at our jackets, she turned to me, her cheeks flushed from cold and exertion. "What made you decide to leave everything behind?" she asked, voice soft against the roar of wind. I looked out at the jagged horizon, breathed in the scent of pine and promise. I realized that freedom isn't about avoiding responsibility, I said, but about choosing the right responsibilities, ones that nourish rather than consume you. She took my hand, squeezing it. "And I'm glad you chose you." Now, when I reflect on that night at her cousin's anniversary dinner, on the flash of 50 cents and the hush that followed, I see the moment not merely as humiliation, but as the catalyst for transformation. I was forced to confront the cost of silence, the price of unspoken sacrifice. In stepping away, I discovered that strength often lies in setting boundaries, in refusing to be the silent ATM for someone else's vanity. I learned that love, when genuine, does not demand blind obedience, but thrives on mutual respect and honesty. Today, as I stand on my apartment balcony watching ferries slip across Elliott Bay, I feel a quiet gratitude for every twist that led me here. The betrayals that pried open my eyes, the collapse that cleared space for truth, and the solitude that taught me to listen to my own voice. Rin joins me at my side, her arms slipping around my waist, and we watch the city lights flicker on one by one. No illusions linger between us, just two people sharing a moment of genuine connection. Sometimes freedom doesn't roar. It whispers in the rustle of spruce needles and the click of a coffee cup on a counter. And sometimes, that whisper carries the power to change everything.